Vitalik is the co-founder of Ethereum and one of the most influential people in cryptocurrency and technology broadly defined. Quick mention of our sponsors: Athletic Greens, Magic Spoon, Indeed, Four Sigmatic, and BetterHelp. Check them out in the description to support this podcast. As a side note, let me say that Ethereum, Bitcoin, and many other cryptocurrencies have been taking a wild ride of prices going up and down in the past few months. To me, the prices were never as important as the ideas, both technical and philosophical. Cryptocurrency has the potential to empower billions of people to participate in the global economy in a way that resists the manipulation by centralized power. Also, with smart contracts, layer 2 technologies, data pools, NFTs, and of course, integration of artificial intelligence into the whole thing, we have the opportunity to build tools and worlds that transform physical and digital life as we know it, hopefully minimizing the suffering in the world and maximizing the fun. This is the Lex Friedman Podcast, and here is my conversation with Vitalik Buterin. Let's first talk about Shiba Inu, if we can. Also known as Shiba token, code SHIB. For context, Shiba Inu was created in August 2020, modeled off of Dogecoin by the anonymous founder known as Ryoshi. On May 10th this year, it had a market capitalization of over 13 billion. And maybe you can explain this, but in a crazy move, you were given half of SHIB's total supply. You burned, aka destroyed, 90% of it. That's worth $6.7 billion. And you donated 10%. That's worth $1.2 billion at the time to an India COVID-19 relief fund, saying you don't want to be the locus of this much power. This is fascinating. Why and how were you able to walk away from this much money and this much power?
So I should probably start by giving some of the backstory around these coins and this concept of giving me coins. So first of all, Shiba Inu, as you said, is this kind of knockoff of Dogecoin, right? And Dogecoin was this initial kind of fun coin that was created back, I think, around 2014 or so. And it was just created by Jackson Palmer and put it out as a joke for a couple of hours, and a community formed around it. And at the beginning, people didn't take it very seriously. I actually remember putting about $25,000 into Doge sometime around 2016. And I just remember just thinking to myself, like, okay, how am I going to explain to my mom that I just invested $25,000 into dog coins? And what even are dog coins? Like, the only interesting thing about this coin is that there's, a logo of a dog somewhere. But, of course, that ended up being one of the best investments I've ever made. And it did really well. And then at the end of 2020, Elon Musk, of course, started talking about Dogecoin, and the market cap just shot up to about $50 billion. Actually, and it shot up multiple times, right? Like, the first time it went up from about 0.8 cents to about 7 cents. And this just happened all in one day. And I remember this was when I was still in Singapore in the middle of COVID, and I saw that the price just went up by 1,000%, and I was like, oh my God, my Doge is worth a lot. And so I immediately called up some of my friends and told them to drop everything and scramble. And I sold half the Doge, and I got $4.3 million, donated the proceeds to give directly. And a few hours after I did this, the price dropped back down from about 7 cents to 4 cents, right? So I managed to sell the Doge at the top, and I remember just feeling like I was such an amazing trader. But then, of course, the price went up from 4 cents, then to 7, and then 50, and just Doge becoming this big phenomenon where there's even a lot of people that have heard of Doge that have not heard of Ethereum. Is just something even I wasn't predicting, right? And so after that, of course, we have Doge, and then people are thinking, well, if the leading dog token is worth $50 billion, then surely the second largest dog token deserves, at least 7 or 8 billion, right? I feel like that's kind of what the mindset of these Shiba people is. So then, of course, they did this other gimmick, right, where they gave me half the Shiba token supply. they were actually not the first projects to do this. So around the end of 2020, there was this weird project called Teller. It's like Tellor. I think they're a Chainlink competitor or something like this. But I remember they just like dumped $50,000 worth of their token into my wallet, and then they had their Twitter army just like basically run around saying, look at Vitalik's wallet. Vitalik holds Tellers. He's one of us. He's a supporter. And as soon as I discovered this, I just like publicly sold the Teller tokens on Uniswap, and this created a bit of a Twitter splat. Now, the Shiba people were more clever. The Shiba people, instead of dumping to that wallet, they dumped to my cold wallet, right? So in like cryptocurrency, right, there's this concept of like cold wallets and hot wallets. Basically, like the thing that actually owns your money is like this 80-digit number called a private key, right? And a hot wallet is when that private key is just stored in memory on your computer, on your phone, really easy to access. Cold wallet means it's either written down on a piece of paper, or it's on a computer that's just never accessed the internet, right? So cold is very inconvenient, but cold is also much more secure, right? Because even if that computer has some like viruses on it, like it's like air gapped, it's not actually going to be able to upload it. So this cold wallet, and like all the money is out of the cold wallet, so it's safe for me to talk about my setup now, right? But it was a laptop that was sitting in Canada, and I also had 2 pieces of paper where I wrote down 2 numbers on those 2 pieces of paper. Mm-hmm. One was with me, one was in Canada, and if you add those 2 numbers together, you get the private key. So because of COVID travel restrictions, and this is this cold wallets in Canada, like it's very difficult for me to actually access it, right? And I'm not sure if they knew this. Maybe they just got lucky. But like basically, they sent a lot of these dog tokens into this wallet where it was very difficult for me to access it. But then I saw these dog tokens, I saw more and more people talking about them, and then at some point I realized that like, hey, these things are worth billions of dollars, and like, there's lots of really good things that you could do with that amount of money, and it would actually be a waste to just like see it go. So I made the decision that like I would actually power through and figure out how to like safely like basically get my private key. I actually had to call up my family, tell them to read out their number off of their piece of paper. I entered that into a fresh laptop that I bought from Target. Then I put in my other number on my piece of paper, added the 2 numbers together on the computer. There's the key. And at the same time, like just scrambled for 2 days, setting up a new wallet where I could move my ETH to safely, like getting people to be multi-sig partners, just like doing all sorts of like stuff that 10 years ago you would expect to just be part of a cyberpunk science fiction novel, but now it's all real.
So you're doing this all by yourself, essentially.
Most of it by myself. So you
have to keep it secret,
right? And I needed my family to actually like go and read the number on their piece of paper, and then I in my new multi-sig wallet, like there's other people that are signatories, but I'm obviously not going to reveal any details beyond that. So I did this, right, and I actually managed to like get the private key, make the first transaction that would just move all my Ether to the multi-sig wallet so it's safe, and then second put the private key on my main computer, then started, like going in and just selling some of the dog tokens and then just like giving them to these different charities. Now, at the time, I actually did not even like have any idea of how much you would be able to get, right? Because like on paper, the dog tokens are $7 billion, but like in reality, it's a very liquid market. Are you going to crash it by after you sell 1 million worth? Are you going to crash it after 10 million? Are you going might you actually be able to get like an entire 200 million? I had no idea. So I definitely was just of the mindset like, okay, I'll sell a bit, maybe get some ETH, and then, donated some ETH to give well, donated some to other groups, and then, okay, have some dog tokens. Like, I don't have an easy ability to sell more myself, but then I'll just like give them to these groups and like, hopefully they'll do good things with them. It was actually, I actually donated 20% and dumped 80%. Okay. Yeah, so the COVID India group got one batch, and then there's another group that got another batch. And I don't want to say who they are because I think they want to announce themselves at some point.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's, you can see the fact that these transactions were made on the blockchain. But no, it was just very interesting and unexpected, and just an insanely crazy situation.
It's been a couple of weeks. First of all, thank you for helping me hang up some curtains. This is a first for the podcast, and shows that you're truly a special person to be willing to help. But now, a couple of weeks later, do you regret any aspect of that decision?
I'm sure there's some things that I probably could have done better. Like I was actually talking to some of these charities, and I was impressed by just how much money they managed to get out of selling some of these coins. So I probably could have done better by just like talking more with traders and actually ensuring that like they can do a better job of maximizing the value uh, of all of them. But like it was a very stressful time, and I did have to act quickly. Like I did manage to make a lot of the donations before, like a few days before the great crypto crash happened. So it was, and it's difficult to like. Obviously, there's parallel universes in which I did better, but at the same time, there's also lots of parallel universes where because I hesitated more and tried to spend more time thinking, I missed the opportunity. So on net, it's like a luck of the draw, and I'm just happy that everything was able to turn out as well as it did.
But psychologically, you mentioned stress. How hard was it?
It was stressful, right? I think, well, one of the really stressful parts was just the fact that I had to basically move all of my funds, including the 325,000 Ether from one cold wallet into another hot wallet, or sorry, into another multi-sig wallet. And maybe the multi-sig wallet had a bug in it. Maybe there's like some mistake I'll make in the middle that causes the funds to get lost. Like, that part was stressful, and I was definitely stressing out for 2 days. I mean, triple checking the new wallet. I even did a bit of an audit of the code myself. I wrote my own JavaScript dApp to make confirmations because Gnosis Safe didn't work with the status wallet well. So there was that whole thing was definitely a bit of a marathon. I was also kind of definitely a bit worried about, or uncertain, I guess, how the public and, including the coin communities would perceive the whole thing. But I was actually impressed. Like for every poster that was saying like, no, why did Vitalik like rug pull on us? His wallet was supposed to be a burn address. There's like 10 people that are like, oh, I thought I was just in this because it's a fun pyramid gambling thing, but instead I ended up being part of this great public good thing for humanity, and that's like even more amazing. So the amount of that I got was very impressive. So all in all, I think the dog people did great.
The dog people. Is there something you can extend to the bigger picture of it? In the principles you applied in making this decision, is there some principles, philosophies that you apply also to the decisions you make around Ethereum?
I think a big one for me is just this idea that crypto, isn't just an opportunity to give people like slightly better ways to save value and all of these things. Like it's also an opportunity to like basically create these like new digital institutions that could like serve the public good in new ways. And that's something that I've been interested in for a long time. I actually even have this article in Bitcoin Magazine back in 2014 where I basically suggested this idea that you would have coins that represent causes, and like people would just like buy and accept those coins because they support those causes. So I think it's called Markets, Institutions, and Currencies: A New Form of Social Incentivization, or something like that. And I'm sure you can find it and throw it in the links. So that was interesting to kind of see becoming real. And like in general, right, I think public goods are very important, and on the internet public goods are even more important, right? Like every single Lex Friedman podcast is just on YouTube, and anyone can go and see it. Like there's no way for you to like sell it and so that some people can see it but then other people can't see it. Like you could do that, but then you'd obviously be reducing your impact. So thank you for making the amazing Lex Friedman podcast so freely available.
Well, that's actually a tense thing, is how do you do it in a way that's not controlled in a centralized fashion? Because actually YouTube feels free and open, but it nevertheless is one company making centralized decisions. And the first time I realized YouTube is not forever is when a lot of the Joe Rogan Experience library was pulled from YouTube as part of the Spotify deal. And it made me realize we need to, it's like the realization that fiat money is centralized, is realizing that, this is not forever, and you might want to come up with schemes to distribute it, to decentralize the control of it in the way that audio for podcast is with just an RSS feed.
Exactly. No, and I think one of the kind of philosophical things that I hope to achieve is kind of decouple the concept of public goods, which are incredibly important and are the lifeblood of modern civilization, from the idea that there is or can be one central organization that represents the public and perfectly understands and can impose their idea of what is the good. Right, it's when people talk about public goods, it just often comes with this baggage of either centralization or conformism, and I think it doesn't have to, right? Often the most important public goods are the ones that are created by the crazy individualists that disagree with everyone else. So trying to make this kind of synthesis where you combine the values of decentralization and the values of open source, but you're not naive about it, and you realize that for these things to be produced, there needs to be a way for it to be sustainable. There needs to be some way of supporting people who are working these projects, but at the same time, you want to avoid that turning into a vector of centralization, trying to sort of get all of the good things without the bad things. To me, that's a big part of sort of what my grand experiment in crypto is about. Right? And we are doing things in different kinds of things for this, right? There's the Gitcoin grants quadratic funding in the Ethereum ecosystem. There's obviously these Dogecoins that just happens, I guess, accidentally. There's other projects that, for example, Uniswap has their Uniswap DAO that just has a huge amount of funding. And we haven't seen yet how that's going to be deployed, but it could be potentially deployed to do lots of really good and amazing things.
Do you see Ethereum as essentially a mechanism to fight for social causes?
I definitely see Ethereum as being a mechanism to fight for definitely some specific things that are social causes, just the fact of creating an open financial system that anyone can participate in no matter where they are in the world. That's a social cause. Just giving people the ability to organize and create projects, even if it's 5 people in 5 different countries. And that kind of inclusiveness, I think that's a social cause, and it's a core crypto value. But then at the same time, the other important kind of part of the magic of Ethereum that you have to balance that against is that it is also this open platform where ultimately, the things that are on Ethereum is just the things that the community makes of it.
Well, you kind of briefly opened the door, so let's go there. When it comes to government regulation of crypto, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario in terms of, as you've kind of mentioned, Ethereum challenges the power centers of the world, and how do you see the interplay between governments and this new technology that resists centralized power? Best case and worst case.
The best case is that blockchains continue to prosper, and we figure out scalability so that people can actually start doing things on all of the amazing use cases that people have been talking about, instead of today where a lot of the great stuff gets priced out because transaction fees are at $5 to $10, and then we see a lot of different amazing applications happening on blockchains. It could be DAOs creating new ways for people to interact and organize with each other, new ways for artists to get funded, and just all sorts of these amazing things. And there's just enough public support and just enough people that see that, look, crypto is clearly doing a lot of good things. And there are definitely areas where there's tensions, but there's areas where there's tensions, like there could be some kind of creative and interesting approaches that get figured out, right? Like, the concept of corporate taxes, for example, right? Like, it doesn't, it that would disappear as a revenue stream if theoretically corporations just all get replaced by DAOs. But I don't know, like maybe there's some other creative way by which DAOs themselves can kind of be have some kind of encoded governance that ensures that they have at least some kind of bias towards serving the global public good. And maybe it does enough of DAOs can do enough of that people are happy with it. And there are going to be things that people are unhappy about. There's always going to be the people that wants to surveil everyone. But if on the kind of effect of crypto from just empowering people is greater than that and greater than that in a way that people can just easily see, then that would be a good scenario, right? And we'll just like become kind of incorporated and accepted the same way as happened with the internet. But in the worst case scenario would, of course, be just like people suddenly, flipping and going into moral panic mode and just, oh my God, like this technology is used by like, insert bad group of the day. And then I don't think governments have the ability to ban crypto to the extent of just preventing blockchains from existing, but they definitely have the ability to really marginalize it, right? Like if you just ban all exchanges, and ban all links from the fiat ecosystem to crypto, and you ban all kind of mainstream employers from accepting or paying in cryptocurrency, then you can successfully turn it into a fairly kind of niche countercultural thing that has much less impact than it otherwise would. So it's somewhere between the good scenario and the bad scenario. I'm obviously hoping for the good.
Well, that's interesting. Also, the tension between governments and companies. Like if you have a bunch of billionaires or a bunch of companies like Tesla investing in Bitcoin and then governments resisting that, it's interesting who wins out in that worst case scenario. And it, almost when companies and rich, quote unquote, respectable people embrace cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, so on, even the dog coins, it's almost sends a signal to everybody else that this is a revolution that's here to stay. On this one little tangent that you brought up, this is almost an outdated idea, but it's still with us, which is cryptocurrencies are used for illegal activity, for drugs, for crime, and so on. Is there some sense that worries you that if cryptocurrency, if Ethereum runs the world, then crime, making money from crime will be easier?
There's always that possibility, but at the same time, I think if you look at, the world as a whole and the way all the other technological trends are going, in-person surveillance is just going up every year, right?
Yeah.
If you commit a crime in, meat space, it's getting harder and harder to get away with it. So if you wants to do something, and this is something that's just happening as a result of, just better technology information transparency. A lot of it's hard to prevent even if you really tried. So the world where things go dark to such an as the police hawks sometimes like to say, to such an extent that oh my God, the criminals are committing crimes with impunity and we can't see anything. That just seems unlikely. But on the other hand, the world where there just is no privacy, for example, or the world where there just is no ability to kind of act outside of the confines of mainstream institutions, that's something that's more realistic, and that seems like something that could lead to a lot of a lot of scary things, right? And even from a government's point of view, right? I think governments over the last few years, a lot of them, they're very worried about sovereignty. They're worried about if they're countries, economies, and social environments are just completely dependent on basically foreign tech companies controlled by foreign governments. Like governments are not on team government, right? It's like the Indian government is on team India, the Russian government is on team Russia, and so forth, right? So like they don't want the US to be able to like have this big backdoor into everything. So I mean, I do think that a balance is needed, but at the same time, I do think I guess I definitely like worry more about the possibility that just like without things like crypto, kind of acting outside of institutions becomes too impossible. And I don't even necessarily mean outside of governments, even just outside of corporations, like becomes too impossible, and there's just like terrible things that come as a result. And if things going in the other direction, like it obviously is a risk, but at the same time, I think in the long term, like a crypto can potentially even like offer defenses as much as attacks against that sort of thing.
Yeah, throughout history, many of the most destructive things came from centralized institutions versus sort of from the people operating in the shadows. And I've been talking to a bunch of psychedelics folks, that people doing researchers like Rick Doblin in Johns Hopkins. There's a lot of exciting research on psychedelics. And one thing you could say about operating at the edge of legality, it could actually accelerate the adoption of particular things, like whether it's marijuana or psychedelics. They can help people out. It almost accelerates the policy. It forces the policy to catch up to where the people stand.
Right.
So there's a positive way of doing things that are in the gray area of legality and creating a market that allows people to in a safe way be able to participate in this gray area of legality.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind, of course, is that the set of like the kinds of things that just like payment processors as companies try to restrict you from is much larger than the set of things that's illegal, right?
Right.
Like part of that is because they want to be super conservative, and like the more layers you have, the more they're like conservative because they're scared of what the layer below them will do to them. Sometimes they have their own, moral opinions of various kinds. Like, they go after lots of people, right? Like they make life really hard for, like sex workers, for example. Like, psychedelics, as you mentioned. There's a lot of activity, even including stuff that is totally legal. That just, there's this like, shadow like PayPal credit card government or whatever you want to call it, and that makes it just hard to participate in this stuff. So I think like reducing the number of intermediaries is definitely normally a good thing.
All right, let's talk about one of the most exciting technologies, like technically, philosophically, like socially, financially, in every way, which is Ethereum 2.0. There's a million things to talk about, but at the step one is probably a good thing to do, which is, can you briefly summarize your vision, how Ethereum 2.0 will make Ethereum more scalable, secure, and sustainable?
Sure. So I think recently we've actually been kind of de-emphasizing the ETH 2.0 branding, I guess. So the reason behind that was that originally we envisioned something more like a big grand event where, all the good things would happen at the same time, and it would be a new blockchain, and it would be a new protocol, and people would have to take a lot of effort to migrate over. But later we've slowly changed the roadmap over to something that's much more incremental. Right. So, proof of stake happens kind of over time, and then sharding gets added over time, and all these features get added over time. And so the experience for just a regular Ethereum user still feels very seamless, right? It's like maybe a little bit more complex than the hard forks that we've already done, but from a user's point of view, but like not by that much, right? So the big two things that are happening, right? These are what used to be considered the two flagship features of ETH 2.0, and now they're just, the flagship features of the next evolution of Ethereum.
Yes.
Yeah, as proof of stake and sharding. Right. So proof of stake is a consensus algorithm. It's a consensus mechanism, I should say. It's the difference is that like an algorithm is something that you run by yourself. A mechanism is like it involves like interactions between people, and it could even include incentives and all of that. So a consensus mechanism, so by which nodes in the network agree on, which blocks came in, which transactions came in what order, make sure that once a block gets accepted, it can't get reverted, and all of these things that we expect from a blockchain. So existing blockchains, including Bitcoin, including the Ethereum of today, and including a lot of them, they use proof of work, right? So the reason why we need proof of anything is because like they serve this function that I call kind of economic Sybil resistance. So that's obviously a big word for, especially if you've never heard of Sybils before. But like the basic idea is right that you have a network and you have lots of computers that agree on like which block to accept, and sometimes you get two blocks that get published at the same time, and you just have to agree on an order. So there has to be some kind of voting game. Yeah, but then the question is, well, in this voting game, who gets a vote, who gets to participate? Now, you can't say one person, one vote, right? The reason why you cannot say one person, one vote is because you need some kind of like authority or some kind of mechanism to say, who the humans are, like, and if you don't have that, then a bad guy could just come in with a virtual machine or with a computer that has on it 10 billion virtual machines that have 10 billion, virtual nodes, and then just like say, look, I'm 99% of the network. I should control everything. So to prevent this, what proof of work and proof of stake both do is they basically say, well, the weight of your vote, like how much influence your votes have in the consensus, is proportional to like what quantity of economic resources you bring in. So in the case of proof of work, you prove what economic resources you have because your economic resources are computers, and you prove that you have them by just running them 24/7 using these hash algorithms, right? So this does solve the problem, right? Because in order to attack the network, you have to come in with more computers and like more money invested into computers and electricity than the rest of the network put together. And that's extremely expensive. In proof of stake, instead of relying on people with computers that are just constantly cranking out hashes 24/7, as your like unit of economic resources, you just use like holdings of coins inside the system, right? So all of these blockchains, they have some kind of coin in them. Bitcoin has Bitcoin, Ethereum has Ether. They all have a coin. So why not just use that as the economic resource that you're using to like measure participation? So that's like the core distinction between proof of work and proof of stake. I like proof of stake, and I've liked proof of stake for many years, basically because like it just requires much less ongoing resource consumption. Right, like with proof of work, you have to like actually go and buy these physical computers, and these days, they have specialized hardware, ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. You have to go produce them, and you have to go buy them, and unless you have millions of dollars, you have to buy them from one of these other people who creates them, and those other people often end up taking a huge cut of the profits themselves, and then you have to plug them in. You have to just burn all of this electricity that's just running 24/7. So it consumes a huge amount of energy, right? And and not just energy. It also, just to create the hardware, right? Like people focus a lot on energy, but like actually about half the cost of proof of work mining is the cost of the hardware. So hardware is a very big deal too. And you need this this really big and powerful, like very specialized hardware, the kind that fills up these big warehouses. So proof of stake, you don't really need that much electricity. You just need just a little bit to run a regular computer. You can run proof of stake validators on computers that you already have. So it's just much less resource intensive. And like this is good for a few reasons, right? Like one is the kind of environmental rationale that you're not breaking the environment. The second is that you're not taking away electricity and like other resources from other people, right? Like there's, I think just today I saw a story about like Iran wanting to shut down some Bitcoin mining because it was just grabbing up so much electricity that it was outbidding the nearby towns, and they just didn't have enough. And then there is like Chia, the one that's doing proof of like hard disk mining, basically is just like grabbing up so many hard disks that there's a shortage, right? So that's the second reason. And then the third more selfish reason is that because participating in consensus does not require so much energy expenditure, you don't need to pay people as much to participate, right? So like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they both issue somewhere around 4% of the total supply every year right now to miners. So Ethereum is about 4.7 million Ether, and the current supply is about 115 million. But with proof of stake, like we expect it'll be somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million per year. So that means the supply doesn't have to increase so quickly. So
one of the pros that
Mhm.
that people sort of argue for the proof of work is
Mhm.
that it is secure because it's much more difficult to sort of,
Hmm.
as you've highlighted, it's difficult to participate. Is there what are your thoughts about the security
Mhm.
of the proof of stake
Hmm.
mechanism?
Yeah.
Is there ways to make it secure?
So I think proof of stake is very secure because in order to be able to attack the system, you need to have like basically as much stake as the rest of the network, right? So that means like right now, for example, we have 5 million ETH staking. So you have to come up with 5 million ETH and then join the network.
Mhm.
And then so 5 million ETH is a lot, right? It's like how much is it now? Like $15 billion. So that's actually more than I believe the cost of attacking the Bitcoin network. And then the second thing is that recovering from attacks is much easier in proof of stake than in proof of work, right? Because in proof of stake, you have, like, first of all, we have for many kinds of attacks that you do against this network, we have this concept of like automatic slashing, right? Which basically means that in order to like revert a finalized block. So if there's one block that's like accepted by the network and you try to convince the network to kind of revert that block and accept a different block, in order to make that kind of attack, you basically have to have your validator, like a big portion of your validators signed to conflicting messages. And this is something that like these messages are on the network, like you can go and prove, like, look, these people did it. And so we have this feature in the protocol called slashing, where you basically take all these people who provably misbehaved and you burn their coins, right? And you don't burn anyone else's coins. Now, there are other cases, like, for example, if instead of reverting blocks, the attack just tries to censor everyone, right? Then what you do, everyone who got censored would just like basically create the minority chain. And then the community would basically have to do a soft fork, right? They would just have to say, like, look, this chain is clearly attacking us. This chain is the one not attacking us. And so we're going to join this chain. And then what happens is that on that new chain, the attackers also lose a lot of coins. Right.
Yeah.
So the difference between proof of stake and proof of work is that in a proof of stake system, like you can identify specific participants and you can say, these, and like this isn't like, a human going in and saying, I don't like you, I don't like you, I don't like you. This is like automated, right? You can
So the slashing process is automated.
Yes.
Is there ways it can go wrong? So that's a painful process where the coins are burned.
It is painful, yes. I think, the one big unknown, of course, is like if an attack actually happens, and like if an attack happens that requires the community to actually choose one of these minority forks, then like what would the community actually successfully coordinating on this look like, right? Like it's like we can talk about it and we can write like science fiction novels about it, but like until it's happened, you don't really know the details of like what it looks like and how difficult it is.
What are the channels of communication for the community? If you can enlighten me a little bit, like what,
Mm. Mhm.
in many ways in the political realm,
Mhm.
Twitter is often used as a way to kind of have these emergent phenomena of
Mhm.
large groups of people coming to a consensus
Right.
about a particular idea. And
Mhm.
then there's battle for consensus. What's
Hmm.
in the Ethereum community,
Mhm.
how do people, what are the sources of natural language based communication that have an emergent belief structure that you would
Mm.
say? Or is it all
So
through money? Is it all through trading that the
no, I think
communication happens?
there's definitely talking as well. I mean, like we have to agree on protocol changes somehow, right? Like there's Twitter, there's Reddit, there's GitHub, there's all of the various Ethereum forums, Ethereum magicians, Ethereum research. There's just in-person communication. Then there's just kind of like the hidden web of everyone talking to everyone on Telegram,
Yeah.
or Signal. So it's like some of everything, right? But I think like the thing to emphasize around like can you actually come to consensus on whether or not to fork the chain because the attacker is censoring everyone, just for example, is like everyone who's running a node is going to see almost the same thing, right? Like they're going to be off by a few seconds, and like maybe they'll be off by a few minutes. They'll disagree by a few minutes, but like if it's a serious attack, people are going to know, right? It's not like one of those things where, we're trying to agree on like, I don't know, did Epstein kill himself, or like some, random
Yeah.
political fact where like in reality, no one knows a single thing about what's actually going on, and they're all speculating. Like it is much more visible, right? So we do have that, but at the same time, I'm happy to admit that like these are fairly untested mechanisms, but like at the same time, they're also untested mechanisms in proof of work, right? And like in proof of work, it's even harder because in proof of work, you don't have the ability to like identify and say, like, I'm going to, these miners attacked, and so we're not going to let these miners in. These miners did not attack, so we're going to keep them in. Like you have to pretty much, either take out none of the miners, or you do a fork that changes the proof of work algorithm, which takes out all of the miners, right? So the economics of like recovering from attacks in proof of work, at least to me, actually do seem like more unfavorable. But I'm sure the proof of work people you talk to will give very different and contradictory opinions, and that's totally fine and amazing.
Some people describe MEV, miner extractable value, as an existential risk to Ethereum. What is MEV? How important is it to solve MEV? If it's important, what ideas do you have?
Sure. How about after this one, we'll also talk about sharding, because it's amazing and it's part of ETH.
We'll return back to sharding, and we'll return to the big picture of the scaling problem, as you mentioned.
I love this conversation. Depth first search instead of breadth first. So basically, okay, MEV, miner extractable value. It is not different in proof of work and proof of stake, right? So like if you want to call it, block proposer extractable value, like it sounds less sexy, but we can call it BPEV instead of MEV. Who cares? But
this is a problem in both proof of work and proof of stake.
Yes. So the basic idea is that if you have the ability to choose which transactions go into a block and in what order, then you have the ability to like take advantage of that position for economic gain in a lot more ways than just collecting transaction fees, right? Like for example, there's decentralized exchanges on chain like Uniswap. And like let's say the price of ETH versus USDC was 2,700 the previous block, but then there was a bit of a market drop and now it's 2,680, where you can go on Uniswap and you can just like gobble up the entire part of the automated order book that's like between 2,700 and 2,680, right? And then at the same time you like run a bot and you buy some ETH back at 2,680 and you've just like made about $10 of profit, right? So or well, $10 times whatever the depth is, right? So there's lots of little things like that. There's also things that involve like front running other people's transactions. So one example of this would be that if someone sends a transaction that says, like, I don't know, buy me 5 ETH for whatever price that you can get, but with a maximum of let's say $15,000, then you can go and like you can put a transaction right in front of that transaction, and you can like buy up that ETH first, and then you resell it to him at $15,000 minus one. So
and then you get to make a little bit of money that way.
Exactly. So there's a lot of these different like arbitrage, front running, back running, these different tricks that allow block proposers to get
some percentage on top, like overhead.
Exactly. Okay, and the reason why this is a challenge is because first of all, it sometimes degrades user experience because users get less favorable trades. But there are sometimes ways to like mitigate that for applications. Sometimes it's not that bad. But like the bigger risk that I think some people consider more existential is that there's just much more economies of scale in figuring out how to extract all this revenue. Right? Because if you're just collecting transaction fees, there aren't really economies of scale. There aren't really benefits to centralizing, right? Because it's a very simple formula. You just like grab up the transactions that pay you the most. But with MEV, there's all these sophisticated algorithms. And if you have lots of money, then you can hire really smart people to make amazing algorithms. And then you can use the other half of your money to get a lot of mining power or a lot of stake. And you get a lot of opportunities to use your even better algorithms. So there's this risk that like as a result of this, mining is basically or even validating proof of stake is going to centralize. So I think the ecosystem's best reply to this sort of risk, and it's the direction where projects like Flashbots are going already, is if you can't eliminate the centralization, then you try to firewall it, right? And the way that you firewall it is you basically say, we're going to try to deliberately create a marketplace where people can just do the complicated work of creating what are called bundles, like the bundles of transactions that like are very profitable, right? And then at the other side of the market, you just have like block proposals reminders that are just dumb nodes, and they go and ask the what are called searchers, the bundle creators, and they just ask like, hey, like how much can you give me if I put in your bundle? And then they just take the highest offer, right? So you sort of separate out the task, and you have the easy part, and then you have the hard part, and you have like this special class of actor called a searcher that does the hard part, and then the easy part, the people doing the easy part, which is just miners and validators, they kind of just talk to all the different people doing the searching, and they just accept the highest bidder, right? So, and this is also just like an interesting example of like economic design philosophy, right? Like sometimes you can't just like make centralization go away. Sometimes it's inevitable, but at least you can try to kind of contain it. You can direct it, or you can even sort of firewall it away from core consensus, the parts that really do need to be decentralized. So,
but you don't see it as an existential risk. It's just it's a bit of a problem that has to be constantly dealt with.
It's a risk. Like there's obviously a risk that it's a very severe problem, and that even this Flashbots approach has some fatal flaw or whatever. Yeah. But I'm definitely we're definitely approaching it with the mindset of this is a problem, and like yes, we do have to do some work to solve it, but we're doing it, and so far it's being solved.
Okay, let's talk about the other really, really fascinating part of the future of Ethereum. Let's not call it Ethereum 2.0, but the future of Ethereum that also may require a hard fork. I don't know. You can correct me on this. Is, well, broadly, ideas for scaling.
Yes.
And more specifically, sort of layer 2 or layer 1 and 2 intersection ideas of how to achieve scaling. And at the core of that is the idea of sharding. So first, what is sharding?
Okay. So there's two major paradigms for scaling blockchains, right? As you said, layer 1 and layer 2. And layer 1 basically means make the blockchain itself like capable of processing more transactions by having some mechanism by which it can do that, despite the fact that there's a limit to the capacity of each participant in the blockchain. And then layer 2 says, well, we're going to keep the blockchain as is, but we're going to create clever protocols that sit on top of the blockchain that still use the blockchain and then still kind of inherit things like the security guarantees of a blockchain. But at the same time, a lot of things are done off-chain, and so you get more scalability that way. So in Ethereum, the most popular paradigm for layer 2 is rollups, and the most popular paradigm for layer 1 is sharding.
So one way to achieve layer 1 scaling is to increase the block size.
Yes.
Hence the block size wars, quote unquote. And you actually tweeted something about people are saying that Vitalik changed his mind about he went from being a small block.
I went from being big to small.
Big to small. To them. And but you said I've been a medium blocker all along. So maybe you can also comment on the very basic aspect before we even get to sharding of where you stand on this block size debate.
Sure. So the way that I think about the trade-off is I think about it as a trade-off between making it easy to write to the blockchain and making it easy to read the blockchain. Right. So when I say read, I just mean, have a node and actually verify it and make sure that it's correct and all of those things. And then by write, I mean send transactions. So I think for decentralization, it's important for both of these tasks to be accessible. And I think that they're about equally important, right? If you have a chain that's too expensive to read, then everyone will just trust a few people to read for them. And then those people can change the rules without anyone else's permission. But if, on the other hand, it becomes really expensive to write, then everyone will move on to basically second layer systems that are incredibly centralized. And that takes away from, decentralization and self-sovereignty as well. So this has been my viewpoints pretty much the whole time, right? It's that you need this balance, and going in one direction or the other direction is very unhealthy. In the Bitcoin case, basically what happened was that Bitcoin originally, like at the very beginning, it didn't really have a block size. It just had an accidental block size of 32 or a block size limit of 32 megabytes because that just happens to be the limit of the peer-to-peer messages. But then,
interesting. I didn't even know that part.
yeah, but then Satoshi back in 2010 was worried that even 32 megabyte blocks would be too hard to process, so he put the limit down to 1 megabyte. And I think
by put, you mean sneaked in there?
Yeah, just like made an update to the Bitcoin software that made blocks bigger than one. I think it's 1,000,000 bytes invalid. And I think the impression that most people had at the time is that, this is just a temporary safety measure. And over time, as we become more confident in the software, that limit would be raised somewhat. But back then, when the actual usage of the blockchain started going up, and then it started going up first to 100 kilobytes per block, then to 250 kilobytes per block, then to 500 kilobytes per block, there started kind of coming out of the woodworks this opinion that no, that limit should just not be increased. And then there are all of these attempts at compromising, right? First there was a proposal for 20 megabyte blocks. Then there was the 248 proposal, which is a bit ironic because the 248 proposal started off being a small block negotiating position. But then when the big block people came back and said hey, aren't we going to do this? They're like, oh no, we don't want the block size increases anymore. So there were these two different positions, right? The small blockers, I think they valued 1 megabyte blocks for two reasons. One is that they just really, really believe in the importance of being able to read the chain. But two is that a lot of them really believe in maintaining this norm of never hard forking, right? So the difference between a hard fork and a soft fork is basically that in a soft fork, blocks that were any block that's valid under the new rules was still valid under the old rules. So if you have a client that verifies according to the old rules, then you'll still be able to accept the chain that follows the new rules. Whereas with a hard fork, you have to update your code in order to stay on the chain. And look, they have this belief that soft forks are kind of either less coercive than hard forks, which, by the way, I completely disagree with. I actually think soft forks are more coercive because basically they force everyone who disagrees to sort of go along by default. Or they have this opinion that there's it's more difficult to abuse soft forks to do really mean things or that completely violate people's expectations, like increasing the supply, which is I think there is some truth to that. So because of these reasons, they just say we're only going to do soft forks, and we want to just not do any hard forks. And they eventually discovered this idea called segregated witness that allows for a very tiny block size increase to the equivalent of about 2 megabytes with a soft fork. It's just a really weird and devious trick. Basically what they do is they take the signatures of transactions and then they put them outside of the block, and then they add an extra rule that says that for a block to be valid, the block has to come with a separate basically extension block that contains all of the transaction signatures. Right. So, when you measure it according to the old rules, hey, it adds up to less than 1 million, but actually there's this extension block that the old protocol doesn't even know about. So
it's a hack that seemed to work to in a small way extend the size of the block size.
But so, small block side was happy with these very low levels of block size, and then the big block side wanted to expand to, at the very least go to 4 megabytes, then, maybe 8, 20. There's disagreements within there as well. I definitely was favoring the big side the whole way through, as you can probably tell. But
even though, so the argument against the big is that it makes things more centralized.
Yes, because fewer people can run a node that verifies the chain, and also because any of these things would require a hard fork, and hard forks are inherently risky.
Do you think there's truth to that?
I'm pro hard fork. I think hard forks are actually in a political economic sense, they're better than soft forks.
Well, okay. I think that's a beautiful principle as stated, that soft forks may be more coercive than hard forks. This is not just about cryptocurrency. This is about politics and life. That's fascinating. So you're okay with hard forks. In
Yes.
fact, you think hard forks is the right way to make changes
Mhm.
because then everybody's forced to make a decision.
Right.
Do you accept this change or not, as opposed to ideas being sneaked in behind the door and and the decision is forced on you?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so but hard fork, some people say, this is when they talk about sort of Ethereum, is there's some aspect to a hard fork where you're trying to upgrade a airplane while it's flying. And
I think soft forks are also upgrading an airplane while it's flying.
but it's a smaller upgrades.
That's there's some truth to that. Like
Yeah.
there's